It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce Les Robinson. Les, I think, is described as a changeologist. That's with a profession like that, he'll never be out of work. So I know Les has done a lot of work with Landcare and NRM groups as well as corporate groups generally on the management of behaviour change, and that's really the main focus of what we wanted to get out of this forum was to how to embrace change and how to capitalise on the inevitability of change. So without further ado, I'll leave you with Les. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, folks. My name's Les, and I'm the world's only changeologist. I wasn't quite sure what I did for a living, and a friend of mine, I tried to describe it to a friend, and he said, you're a changeologist. And I thought, okay, good. And I put it on my business card. And I've just written a book called Changeology, which is in all the good bookshops now. And what it's about is how we work with people for change, and what it takes for a person to do something they've never done before. And that's really the business we're in, isn't it? I work with all sorts of agencies. I work with safety regulators and emergency authorities and HIV organisations, and I've done a lot of work with CMAs. And when I was younger, I'm in in the bridge year. I'm doing the bridge thing now, where I've got a young family and a busy job and a mortgage, and I no longer participate as a regular volunteer in the kind of things I used to do. But as a young man, I did. I was in lots of action groups and lots of citizen groups, and so I saw volunteer groups and I saw how they work. And a lot of people ever since then have said to me, "How do we revitalise our group? Because we've been around for a couple of years and we've just got a few members left and we're getting on, and how do we get new members in?" And so that's a good question. Of course, it's not just Landcare that's asking that question. It's every volunteer group in the whole world, or a million of them, have exactly the same issue. And so I thought, as the changeology guy, I should kind of work on a solution. And I thought about it for a long time and got some insights. Just collected insights, and eventually I thought, I think I've got an interesting insight that might make a difference. And I turned it into a 1-hour session at a Landcare Forum in Wollongong, which I called Passion Mashing, and it was such a hit that 2 organisations asked me to develop day-long versions of it. And so I've been going around Australia for the past couple of years doing day-long workshops with Landcare groups about putting the zap back in. And what it's about is rethinking the way we go about. Our greatest enemy when we work with people for change is our own assumptions and what we think will work. And so we keep trying what we think will work, and if it doesn't work, we think, well, we haven't done enough of it, so we'll do more of what we think will work. And if that's not enough, then we'll just pile it on. And obviously it's their fault if they're not responding to it. And so, is there a completely different way of thinking about the business of growing a group and inviting new people in and engaging people and adding new zest and exciting our own passive members who are on the books but don't come along very often? And so I developed this workshop and I've been running it around, and I wanted to today do with you just one thing we do in the workshop, so you get a sense of what I'm talking about. And let me say at the beginning that what we often think our job is to persuade people, to argue with them and explain the importance of the work and how vital it is, and endangered species, place under threat, their landscape needs our help, and we argue with people effectively. What happens when someone comes along and argues with you and tries to get you to do something you haven't done before? You argue back. That's what we all do. It's human nature. We're designed to do that so that we maintain control of our lives in a complicated world. So it doesn't work. And I heard one group said we got a $5,000 grant we used for advertising to try to get more people into our group, and no one came. So it's a real threat. In essence, our thinking is the threat, because we think we should be persuading people because it's important work that someone needs to do. And so, is there a completely different approach? And so this workshop's about that approach. But I thought I would illustrate it this way. Can you turn to the person next to you? And I want you to think, what was the last thing you broke your schedule for? You know how we go through life, we've got a pretty packed schedule, we know what we're doing tomorrow, the day after, it's in the diary, and it's all laid out for us. But sometimes we break our schedule for things. Please tell a person next to you in just 1 minute, what was the last thing you broke your schedule for? So Greg, what was the last thing you broke your schedule for?
Mate rang me up and said, how about we go to the pub for lunch? So I did.
Good. Pub for lunch with mate. Very good. Okay. Who else? What's something else you broke a schedule for? Helen?
I usually play tennis on a Friday morning and I came here instead.
Oh, because so why? Why? Because this is important, isn't it? Okay. And you get to what? What happens here?
Meet other people?
Yeah, meet other people and get inspired. Very good. Now, one thing that we do this, I did this recently with a similar group of people, and it's a little bit similar. What we found is that people break their schedules for two things. One is stuff that's important, things that are important to us in our lives, things that are almost like so important they're part of our legacy as a person. The other thing we break things for are doing things with people in nice places with food and drink. In fact, depending on who you're talking to, the people in nice places with food and drink is way more common than the doing important things. And if we were to actually be honest with ourselves, I guarantee that most of what we break our schedule for is doing things with friends, doing things with family. Even in my case, the last thing I broke my schedule for was going to a local fair down the Oval, about 1 kilometre from where I lived. But why did I do it? I did it because I could take my son, because I knew I would bump into people I knew in my community and be able to catch up with them. So once again, people, nice place, and I realised I get nice lunch there too. So people in a good place, food and things that are important. Now, if that's what we break our schedule for, then maybe there's a bit of a secret there about what someone else would break their schedule for to get involved in a Landcare event or a Landcare group. It might have to have similar qualities. It's important work. Well, yeah, we already know it's important work. But there's that other side, the really social side of it being with people, an enjoyable place, good food and company, and something that's personally rewarding for that reason. So, okay, well, I want to do a little exercise with you now and build on that and look at the way that we can reinvent our Landcare groups. And one of the great difficulties that we have with Landcare is that we're inviting people to do things that are predictable, that they've done them before. They've probably been doing them for years, the people on our books. Or people kind of know what it is and they know, and it's not having that same priority in their lives that it used to have because it's become predictable. And because they know exactly, and because a volunteer is always making a choice between doing staying at home, getting a rest, catching up with family and friends, looking after family, that's one choice, or come along to the volunteer activity. So the volunteer activity is competing with all those things. So how can we rethink what is in that volunteer activity so that it really captures people in the sense of what really matters to them, the way we just heard then. So now I call that reinvention. And reinvention is something that right now Landcare groups all over Australia are doing really dramatically. And I've been doing this for a couple of years, and even in the couple of years I've been doing it, I'm hearing more and more amazing stories about people finding ways not to argue people into our groups, but rather make the things we do and the experiences we give people stuff that's worth breaking your schedule for. So I want to do a little exercise with you now and see if we can do a bit of innovating in our group. Now, this is something that I just did it yesterday in the Hunter with 40 people, and it was kind of amazing, and I walked away inspired myself by what we could create. Now, when you think about innovation, the threat, as I said before, the threat that we have is our assumptions, and you can call that the conventional model, conventional thinking. And what is the standard model of Landcare is actually a threat to innovation, and it's a threat to new people coming in, because the reason they're not coming in might just be because of what that standard model is. So how could we vary or modify that standard model so it becomes more engaging, the kind of thing that people will just want to be at and break their schedule for? And when we work with people, the best way to work with people is not to tell them stuff, but to ask them questions. So I want to suggest to you a really good question. If not, then what? If not a particular aspect of what we do, then what? And I want to illustrate it by giving you a model of the way we could make change in our groups or change when working with other people. Let's take a museum as an example. So what's the conventional model of a museum? Okay, so it's a building, right? It's a building. And what's in the building? Exhibits of old stuff. Very good. And who organises that stuff? Old people. Who organises that stuff? Curators. And how do we interact with it? We go there during business hours, we walk inside the building, and what happens to us when we're in there? You have to be quiet. What else happens in there? You can't touch anything. Very good. You walk around, and what do you actually do? You read the little things that the curators wrote for you, which are facts, and then you walk out again. Essentially, having learnt, they thought we needed to learn something, and there it is, right there. So that's the standard model of museum, okay? Cool, right? So what if we played with it a bit? What if we broke it into its individual components? And this is the kind of thinking that happens when people are, really professional innovation teams who are inventing whole new service models and things. They use, this is one of the models of thinking they use. They said, okay, let's take into each individual bit and say, if it wasn't a building, what could it be? A park, what else could it be? A web page, what else could it be? A travelling exhibit, what else could it be? An open air display? Good. It could be lots of open air displays. It could cover a whole region at different spots in the region. Good, okay. If it didn't have exhibitions, what could it have? Interactive web pages. What else could it have? Touchscreens. What else could it have? Create your own. Or it could have performances. Very good. What else could it have? Pardon? Games. Excellent. What else could it have? What about a museum of experiences? Right. If it didn't focus on a museum of food, if it didn't focus on objects, what could it be? What could we be focusing on? Thoughts. Oh, nice. What else? Pardon? People. That's great. What else? Oh my goodness. Okay, good. A museum of imagination. What about a museum of inspirations that was randomly distributed over a whole district, and all you had to do was GPS your way to the location, and there would be an inspiration for you? Okay, good. If it wasn't organised by curators, who could organise it? Volunteers. Who else? School kids. 4-year-olds. Wouldn't that be cool? Who else could organise it? Anyone with an idea. Good. It could be crowdsourced. It could change from day to day. If you didn't need to visit it, how could you interact with it? Over the internet. You're very online. If it didn't have to visit it and it wasn't on the internet, how could you interact with it? It could visit you. Very good. Okay. And if people didn't learn facts, what could they take away? Emotions. Good. Experiences. Ideas. What about memories? Someone said something about another one was, if you didn't focus on objects, if you could somehow focus on yourself, on your own history. So I'm not quite sure how that would work, but it was a beautiful idea to build on. So we just completely reinvented what a museum is, didn't we? And we just made it a hell of a lot more advanced than the current 19th century museum model that we're kind of stuck with. And that's the museum I would like to participate in. So hey, why don't we try this with Landcare? Would that be cool? Let's see what we come up with. So let me start. Who was in it? Who was in the typical Landcare group? Now this is not your group. This is the standard, conventional, typical Landcare group on average. Pardon? I say retired people who are about how old? 60-somethings. Do they have bad backs? Like with bad backs. How many of them are there? About plus or minus 6. Good. All right. And what do they do? They go to meetings. Anything else? And they plant. And they weed. And they write reports for the federal government. Good. Pardon? They inspire. How do they inspire? How do they do that? Who to? Okay, so that's right there. So what happens at the meetings is people talk and share and hopefully inspire. Good. All right. Good. Now, what else? Let me think. How often do you meet? Right, monthly? Maybe quarterly? Put monthly. Where do you meet? Boring hall. What do you eat? What is the standard model? Barbecue. Barbecue, scones, tea and bickies. When a new member arrives, how do we interact with them? You make them the president. How are new members introduced into the group? Apart from that, this is very good. Okay, they get an info pack. And they're sussed, information pack, and please take a seat at the meeting. Okay, have we captured the essential model? Meetings, monthly, boring hall. Planning meetings, plant weed, plan, lobby. And fill in funding applications. Ah, good. Okay, we'll keep that aside. So look, have we captured the basic model? Okay, so field days of some sort. Good. Okay, so it's quite a wide range of things, which is cool. Okay, here's what I'd like you to do. Please, with the person next to you. Now, I want to give you a mission, teams. The mission is, I want you to take each one of you be a scribe. So one of you get some paper, preferably the person with the largest piece of paper. And I want you to, I'm going to create 3 minutes of silence for every single one of you to answer a question which was, if not that, then what? If not retired 60s with bad backs, then who? If not meetings where you talk and share, plant and weed, plan and lobby, then what? If you didn't meet monthly or at the same time, then what? If you weren't meeting in a boring hall, then what? If you didn't do barbecues, scones and tea and bickies, then what? And if you didn't just give new members an info pack, then what? You see what I mean? So if not, then what for each one of those? It's starting to become more like the kind of group that I would want to get involved in. I'll tell you what the group I would be involved in is it would be the Coffee and Chocolate Lovers Spanish Learning Toddler Friendly Landcare group. And I would be at every meeting because it would be absolutely right for me as a person. And that's what we just did in that exercise. By breaking the conventional wisdom, we started to imagine the kind of group that we would really enjoy coming along to. And if we've done that, then we're also creating something for our passive members who have fallen asleep, and also something for other people. And all of you are great, the way that you identified things for other people. One of the loveliest ideas I heard yesterday was something about new members too, the way they come in, and their very first experience is absolutely critical. And the idea was that every new member, they get really welcomed and they get a buddy when they arrive at the meeting, but then afterwards someone visits them at home with a special gift pack with local wine, local produce, and a fluoro vest that says Landcare Volunteer. Pardon? Yeah, isn't that amazing? So, and a pair of gumboots for a leg. Good idea. Isn't it great once the ideas start coming, they just keep coming. So I'm getting a little short of time, so I just want to quickly summarise what we did then. What we did was we had a little brainstorm. Now, all the answers we came up with are not the answers for everyone, but that's a very simple method. It only took about 20 minutes that we can take back to our groups. And all we need to do is not say, here's a good idea, I'd like you to do it, but rather, let's look at all the things we do now, break it up like this, and then say as a group, if not, then what for each one, and see what your group creates. Then look at that list and say, what'll we try? And start to evolve and reinvent the kind of experience that we're able to offer people. Before I finish, I want to give you a really quick zap through a document that I just prepared where I gathered together a lot of ideas that I've been hearing from other groups as I've gone around. It's on my website. It's called If Not, Then What? So if not, the usual name of a group, what about the Mud Crabs, the Fish and Chippers, the Saturday Afternoon Tea Group, the Willow Warriors, the Beer Makers Bush Club, Jam Care, Le Bush Care, where you practice your French, and Coffee and Chocolate Lovers Bush Care Group, the one for me. What if not the usual suspects, then who? What about green nomads or grey nomads? What about people in retirement villages? What about children, corporate team building groups, singles, we already heard about, visitors and tourists, geeks who care, nature lovers everywhere, and youth who like to party? And there's some really noticeable... who's heard of Regen, Dance Plant? There's actually quite a few of these things, really youthful, fun, party-style Landcare already happening. If not, what about the usual place where we do our Landcare work when we're doing physical work? What about a beautiful place that only needs a touch-up every now and then? What about roadside nature strips? What about roving hands who don't have one place but work at a different place every month? What about a wildcard site you only find out about the night before? What about on a bike track or a frog habitat or a riverbank you can only get to by canoe, or halfway down a cliff, or somewhere wild and remote and beautiful? If not the usual time, what about sunrise with bacon and eggs? What about full moon nights? What about twilight evenings? What about daylight saving afternoons? What about a different time of day every month? Because different times suit different people. If not the usual refreshments, then what? What about freshly brewed coffee and fair trade chocolate? Before and after. If you do it before, imagine how much focus everyone's going to have while they're listening and engaging. What about tea flavoured with native plant leaves? What about bacon and eggs? What about sunset drinks? What about a chocolate cake baking competition? What about wine tasting? What about edible weeds? What about gourmet food tasting? Barker Creek Landcare Group have a big brew and bake-off. Macquarie Marsh's Landcare Group have a master chef cook-off. If not the usual activities, then what? What about a string quartet, a firefly barbecue, an Easter egg hunt, a Mad Hatter's tea party, a mud fight, a teddy bear's picnic, seed bombing, spotlighting, weaving with weeds, making nest boxes, gorilla knitting, a singing class, a ukulele lesson, a singles dating event, a flash mob, and I've got more and more ideas that go on as well there. And so all these ideas, half of them are already being put into practice by groups around Australia, and the other half are people, ones that people brainstorm and developed in just this kind of workshop. And you can see how they add incredible zest to what we do. What we often focus on the real biophysical side of our work, of the important work that needs to be done. But what we often forget, and we're not that good at in Australia, is really paying attention to the social side. Because above all else, Landcare is a social institution. And I once heard a beautiful description that Landcare helps connect a fragmented society to help connect a fragmented landscape. And paying real attention to the social side makes Landcare into the kind of thing that people really want to be part of, as opposed to doing the usual conventional activities. How does that sound? Could be useful? It's all about just one question, if not, then what? And keep asking it until we go someplace interesting. That's on my website. Yeah, if you just Google me, you'll find my website. Just Google me, you'll find my website, and then that's quite visible on my website, yeah.
I did some group leadership and facilitation training some years ago now. And what comes to mind is her basic rule was, feelings first, facts follow. So when you get into a meeting, is getting everyone to sort of blurt out how they're feeling. Yeah. And once that energy's gone, then they can get on and do business. And a bit of what you're talking about fits that pattern. It's about the
emotions. If we like what we're doing, then everything follows from that as well. Who else has something that occurred to them after this discussion? Yeah?
A question, and it's what I'm calling the Alex question, of the 240 different organisations in a community. I know you had a question on that this morning, but whether you had any ideas, Les, on competition.
Okay, become the kind of organisation that they're all going to want to join. Because they're all having meetings in boring halls, a little bit like this, with standard meeting rules and a president and a secretary, and doing kind of predictable things, and getting tired from doing it. So become the kind of organisation that they're going to break their schedule to come along and be part of. That's what I would say. You know, the groups that do really well are those, I heard a great story, I think it was Three Creeks group in part of Victoria, they have 18 to 20 people to 30 people every time they meet, whenever time they have a field day. And you know what their secret is? A reputation for having active social secretaries. And that's what makes the difference.